Today we are going to the late 19th century, so sit back as we go to Sweden. Anna Månsdotter was born on the 28th of December 1841 in a small village near the city of Kristianstad in southern Sweden. Although her family were relatively poor, the area she lived in was very beautiful, close to the river Helge. She received an elementary education, as in 1842 it became law in Sweden for every local government to establish at least one permanent school, and although in the poorer communities, parents often had little interest in sending their children, most received some schooling. When Anna was considered old enough, she went to work. Sweden was starting to change. Previously, the majority of people worked in agriculture, but as the free trade movement started to gain support throughout Europe, the country began to export more copper, iron ore, and timber. The economy grew, and the opportunities for the Swedish people increased. Like many young women at the time who lived in small rural communities, Anna married when she was relatively young and moved to the coastal village of Ingö, situated next to the Baltic Sea. There were only a few hundred inhabitants, and everyone knew each other. Her husband, named Nils Nilsson, was 13 years her senior and owned a farm just outside the village. When Anna married him, she thought that she would be greatly improving her circumstances, but this was not the case. They lived in a very simple house, and Anna assisted her husband with his work on the farm. The nearest town was Aarhus, which was 7 kilometers away. Over the next few years, Anna gave birth to 3 children, but tragically only one survived into adulthood. Although the improvements in medicine had seen the infant mortality rate decline, it was higher in the poorer communities where Anna and Niels lived. As time passed, their farm started to decline. Life in Sweden was changing. Before 1850, 90% of people lived in the countryside, but after the first railways were opened, a period of industrialisation started, and people started to migrate to the larger cities, where new opportunities for work emerged. Things for the family got worse when Nils became ill and was unable to work. In 1883, he died. Anna was now in her early 40s and a widow. Her son Per was 21 and started to take on the responsibility of managing the farm. As they got on with working and trying to improve their finances, rumours started to spread throughout the village that Anna and Per did not live in the house as mother and son. Instead, the two were engaged in an incestuous relationship. Of course, this was always denied by Anna. She decided the best way to stop all the local gossip was for her son to find a wife, and arranged that he marry a pretty young lady from the nearby village of Brösarp. Her name was Hannah Johansdotter. This seemed like a very good bride for Per, as Hannah was not only charming and intelligent, she was also the daughter of a very well-regarded gentleman named Johan Olsson, who was the local district judge. He and his wife, Hannah Andersson, were both well-respected members of the community. The couple married in 1887, and it was agreed that after the wedding, Hannah should move into the farmhouse with Per, and Anna would go and live with her mother. Anna, however, seemed to be in no hurry to leave. She was quite contented just living in the farmhouse with her son and his wife. But Hannah found her to be a difficult woman, and the relationship between the two ladies started to deteriorate. Although Hannah was happy with her choice of husband, she resented the interference from her mother-in-law. She found that Anna was not at all approachable, and even though she discussed her feelings with Per, he never wanted to cross his mother and seemed to be totally under her control. She wrote to her father and asked if he could help, and although he was sympathetic to his daughter's concerns, there was very little he could do if Anna refused to leave. The situation did not improve, and it became apparent that the two ladies did not get on at all well. Rather than being happy for her son, Anna seemed to be jealous of his young, attractive wife. Hannah again wrote to her parents to tell them how unhappy the situation was making her. She advised them that she could not continue to live in these circumstances, and explained that she had asked Per if they could leave the farm and set up home elsewhere. On the 28th of March 1889, a neighbour came to the house to inquire about Hannah. It was a nice spring morning, but she was nowhere to be seen. The neighbour asked Per where his wife had gone. His answer was vague, and he just said that she had gone out. The neighbour considered this a somewhat strange reply, and asked if she had gone far, and should they both not go and look for her. Per didn't seem particularly concerned, but they decided to look for Hannah. After only a few moments, they noticed that the trapdoor of the basement of the house was open, so Per went down the stairs. He could see that there was something there. It was dark, but with the light from the candle, he discovered his wife lying on the floor. He looked closer and realised that she was dead. The neighbour was shocked at the sight of the pretty young lady's lifeless body lying on the floor of the basement stairs, but Per did not seem to show any emotion. The neighbour rushed to get help from other villagers, and together they moved the body from the basement to the bedroom. They also summoned the local priest. At first it was presumed that Hannah must have fallen down the basement stairs to her death, but as the people who had gathered around the bed looked more closely, they noticed that there were bruises and marks on her neck. And although she was fully dressed, she wasn't wearing her corsage. This was a sleeveless article of clothing that covered the body from the neck to the waist, and was very common in Europe during the 18th and 19th centuries. No one could ever recall seeing Hannah without one. The police were called, and they immediately suspected that the death looked suspicious and needed further investigation. They arranged for an autopsy to be performed, the results of which concluded that the cause of Hannah Johansdotter's death was strangulation. The police arrested both Per and Anna and interviewed them about the circumstances surrounding the death of Hannah. At first, both said that the poor woman must have fallen down the basement stairs. The basement was a dark place, and Hannah would often have to go there. The autopsy, however, had come to a very different conclusion, and the police continued to interrogate mother and son. Eventually, Per confessed to the murder of his wife. The police, however, had considered that Anna was probably the instigator of the terrible crime. She seemed unconcerned about Hannah's death and had been unexpressive throughout her interrogation. They believed that she controlled her son, and even if she had not committed the actual crime, she had certainly been the one who had orchestrated it. Neighbours told them that Hannah was very unhappy at the way her mother-in-law treated her, and that Anna seemed to be very jealous of Per's young, attractive wife. They told the police about the local gossip concerning the improper relationship between Anna and her son. They also informed them how many villagers thought that Per only married Hannah after the rumours had intensified. Hannah's father showed the police the letters from his daughter. Now everyone could see that her words were a cry for help from a desperate young lady needing assistance in resolving her issues with her mother-in-law, who was constantly interfering with her marriage. Despite all the efforts of the police, exactly how and where Hannah Johansdotter was murdered was never completely established. Although eventually both mother and son admitted that they had committed the terrible crime, their confessions were not consistent with each other's, and trying to ascertain what was true and what was not was somewhat difficult. They concluded that the most likely explanation was that Hannah had discovered Per and Anna were conducting an improper relationship, and in order that she would not be able to speak about it, Anna murdered her. Then, in an attempt to cover it up, they threw her into the basement. It was also believed that Hannah was probably killed at night or in the early hours of the morning, and that Anna had dressed her, and that is why she was found without her corsage. After more than 5 days of interrogation, the police charged both Anna and Per with the murder of Hannah Johansdotter. They were tried at the district court, not only for the murder, but also for having an illegal illicit relationship. Both received prison sentences for the relationship and the death penalty for their part in the killing of the poor defenceless young lady. The sentences were later ratified by the High Court. Their lawyers appealed the sentences. Per's appeal was supported by most of the village. People thought that he was a pleasant young man who had always been controlled by his mother. They believed that she was the person who had instigated the crime and also the one who had strangled Hannah. Hur eventually had his sentence reduced to life in prison, which he served in Karlskrona. Anna's case, however, was different. The letters that Hannah had written to her parents had outlined how she had been treated by her mother-in-law, and during the interrogation and the trial, Anna had shown very little emotion and never expressed any regret for the crime. She was also blamed for the illegal relationship with her son. Despite the fact that no woman had been executed in Sweden for over 30 years, the decision was made that Anna's sentence should be carried out, and her execution date was set for the 7th of August 1890. She was taken to the prison in Kristianstad. Prison guards and the prison chaplain encouraged her to show remorse for what she had done, but she would not. She would also not take Holy Communion on the 6th of August, the night before her execution. At 8 a.m. on Thursday the 7th of August 1890, Anna Månsdotter was led into the courtyard of Kristianstad prison, where she was beheaded. She was 48 years old. She was the last woman to be executed in Sweden. Hanna Johansdotter was buried at the Brösarp cemetery. Her parents were buried in the same grave. Hur was released from prison in 1913. The previous 23 years, however, had taken their toll on him, and he was not in good health. He eventually died 5 years later in 1918. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I will see you in the next brief case